Welcome to Health, Wellbeing and Lifestyle, where experts in the field inform, educate and inspire the community to be healthier, more balanced and live the lifestyle they love. Our first guest today, Sue Williams, is a doctor of quantum counselling and a clinical hypnotherapist, and the topic we'll be discussing is being stuck in your head and 5 pro tips how to break free. Welcome, Sue.
Thank you, Megan. It's great to be here again.
Sue, can you give us 5 tips on how to build mental resilience?
Certainly. The very first thing is to realise what it is that you need to overcome. So if I'm dealing with sports people, they will come to me and tell me, I have this absolute mental block. For example, a basketballer, I'm there doing the free throws, miss every time. This person has realised they have a problem. They know what it is, but they just don't know how to overcome it. So that's the first thing. You need to realise what that problem is so that you can actually go and change it. And then the second one is setting the goal for what you want to change. So it is a goal. In this example, the basketballer wants to get the correct mindset so that every time he's standing on the line, bounce, bounce, straight through. And just a tip that I give the basketballers, being very specific here, is imagine that hoop is this big. How can you miss? And that's part of the goal setting, because then you can visualise what that huge hoop is. So that's a really good tip, and you can customise that to anything that you want to change. And of course, when we're talking about visualisation, everyone has a different learning style. A lot of people are visual. Also, people are auditory. So that particular basketballer will need to hear what the coach is saying, so that he knows exactly where his hands are placed, where his feet need to be, so he's hearing it. And we call this mental rehearsal because that takes in all aspects of different ways of learning. Okay, and then we move on to the kinesthetic learners. And kinesthetic people feel things. So they do feel emotions. Emotions will control their thoughts, but also they have the feelings in their body. So with our basketball example, that particular player, to overcome these, the missing the hoop continuously, they may need their coach to set them up physically in front of the hoop, standing on that free throw line. So this is the way your body should be to give it that perfect arc. The ball goes straight through the hoop every time. So they get in position, and then they feel it through their body. They keep doing that, so that becomes their go-to position, and they know it's going to work. And then, of course, this is what we call mental rehearsal. And use that mental rehearsal to formulate your goals, and then proceed with your particular learning style to work towards those goals. Moving on from our goal setting, we've got our goal, we've done our mental rehearsal, worked out exactly what we do to achieve that goal based on our learning style. And then we set up this routine and we prepare, we set aside time, and then we use that routine to practice that mental rehearsal over and over again. And that's what will separate the elite athletes from the weekend warriors. So it's the practice, practice, practice. That's what they do. Our goals can just be so airy-fairy if we don't plan and do the practice. They won't be attainable if you don't put in the work. And to help us achieve our goals, what we can do to get into that zone, not necessarily the zone we use for competing, but the zone where our imagination is alive, where we are focused on what we're going to do in our routine that day, is to develop a breathing practice. And breathing is amazing for a number of reasons. we're concentrating on the breathing, but it's also enabling us physically to bring in the oxygen, oxygenate ourselves, so that if we're a sports person, for example, our muscles are going to work. They're going to be well oxygenated. The blood will be flowing because we're breathing the correct way. And we breathe in through our nose. We do that so that the air actually gets warmed before it reaches our lungs. We breathe deep down into our abdomen. And we can tell if we're shallow breathing because we'll begin. If we're breathing deeply, breathe down into the abdomen. That actually gives us room for the lungs to be drawn down so that they can really fill with the air. So breathing in, and as you breathe in through your nose, have your tongue against the roof of your mouth. And that, for whatever reason, makes this breathing so much more effective. I'm not sure of the physical reason, but I know it makes it very effective. Breathing all the way down into your abdomen so that the lungs can fill completely. Hold it and then out through the mouth.
Any advice for our viewers?
Find a professional in whatever area of life your goal is. So if, for example, like the sports people who come to me, if they're looking for help, they seek my help using hypnosis and also other modalities that I'm qualified in to assist them with their mental well-being and their physical well-being. But also, if you're not sure if you're a sports person, find a good coach who'll be able to get your body set up in the perfect way for your particular sport. And mental health professionals, if you've got something that's happening in your life that you need help with, go to the professional. Don't try and work out these tricky things by yourself, because you'll get stuck in that spiral, that vicious cycle where you just don't overcome it, and you're stuck. You've got that mental block. So find the relevant professional, always the first step, and then see what they can do to help you, and you may be able to move on and do something else, set another goal.
Thanks, Sue. That's such valuable information. If you'd like to know more about Sue Williams and how to build mental toughness and get unstuck, please go to her webpage on our website, healthwellbeingandlifestyle.com.au. And after the break, we have another interesting guest with another interesting topic. Stay tuned. After the break, Denise Mokadsi will explain what happens if you are struggling with menopause and how your genes guide you back to balance. Welcome back. Our second guest is health coach Denise Mokadsi. We'll be discussing the topic of if you're suffering with menopause, how your genes can help guide you back to balance. Welcome, Denise.
Hi, how are you going?
Why do women experience such different symptoms when it comes to hormonal changes during menopause?
Everyone's different, and hormonal fluctuation during menopause can be such a roller coaster for so many different women. I think understanding why symptoms are so different from one woman to another can be really clearly understood using the lens of epigenetics. And so epigenetics is a term that maybe some people have heard of. The viewers might have heard of the term but don't really understand it. And I find it really helpful to help women understand what they're going through and perhaps why they're going through certain symptoms. And so epigenetics, the way I like to explain it is you can think of a recipe, for example, and you've got all the different ingredients that go into that recipe, but how you put that recipe together, or how you add the ingredients, or how much if it's a pinch of salt and maybe the pinch is a big pinch or a little pinch, that will all affect the final taste of that recipe. And so we're a little bit like that. That's a little bit like our genes. Our genes are all the ingredients. We can't really change our genetic information, but how we put it together is like our lifestyle. And the whole picture of that is basically epigenetics. So it's our lifestyle, all the things that we're doing in our life that influence our genes or the expression of our genes. There's a couple of reasons why women will experience going through menopause very different from one another. One, our genes are different, so how we're going to experience hormonal changes will be different just because of the genes that we've got and how our body responds to those hormonal changes. And also our lifestyles are quite different from one another. So both of those things, as part of what the epigenetics is going to be a big factor in how women experience menopause or the perimenopausal transition. So when we can look at both elements, we can help women really understand what's going on. We can look at their genes, we can see how they might be detoxing or not detoxing estrogen, for example, and estrogen will change quite a lot through the perimenopausal period. And what are their lifestyle habits? What are they doing that might be worsening some of the symptoms that are associated with menopause?
How can women understanding their genetics influence things like weight loss, hot flushes, anxiety, that sort of thing?
We can look at certain genes and we can tell women, or anybody really, how they will metabolize fats, what kind of rate of metabolism they have, and what other factors might be missing, or like enzymes or vitamins or cofactors that cause certain reactions to happen in the body that help. So for example, there's a gene that helps you detox estrogen. If someone doesn't have that gene, or there's a variation on that gene, how they detox estrogen will be very different to someone who has the gene. That's some ways that we can use it. The other ways that we can use it doesn't even have to be the genetic sequence or those ingredients in the recipe. If they're carrying a lot of weight, for example, we might look at what foods are they eating. Is that not suited to their genetics? And is that just adding another stress on their hormonal changes through menopause? They get another stress to that. So we will just do an assessment and see all the lifestyle things that they're doing, what things could they improve on to help improve their symptoms.
Denise, in terms of tips for our viewers, what are some key lifestyle changes women can make to support better hormonal health during the periods of premenopause and menopause?
So again, we can get right down to individual strategies for people depending on what their genes are and their lifestyle, but probably generally for most women going through menopause, because it is such a hormonal roller coaster, a lot of it is under the influence of how we're metabolizing or sensitive to insulin. So a big key thing for perimenopausal or menopausal women to think about is their carbohydrate or sugar consumption. And by that, I don't mean carbohydrates from fruits and vegetables, like whole food carbohydrates are still quite good, but it's more the highly processed carbohydrates and the sugars that are influencing how much insulin is released. And when that is more of a load during menopause, when hormones are already fluctuating quite a lot, it adds another thing for that body to try to balance and to work out. Menopause is a very good time to see what's going on under the surface. Sometimes when you've got a few little things during menopause, those problems become much bigger. So sugar and insulin is a big one for menopausal women, but also alcohol is a really big one too, because again, of the detoxing of the hormones during menopause, that's a big load for the liver. And when we add alcohol into the system, the liver also has to try to manage the alcohol and detox the alcohol. So it's just another load, and it just means that the liver's not working to manage the hormone detoxification processes, and we feel the results of those toxins building up in the body more. And another important thing is about muscle mass. As we get older, muscles shrink. We're not growing muscle as much, and they get smaller. We lose muscle mass over years, and that's everybody. But for menopausal women especially, we want to make sure that we're maintaining muscle mass to protect our bones, like to have some good solid weight on the bones to strengthen the bones. And also muscle is very metabolically active tissue, and a lot of women during menopause struggle with their metabolism and gaining weight. So the more muscle we have, the higher our metabolism is, and that can help manage, you know, these common frustrations of weight gain during menopause. But I think, you know, if someone's really struggling with all of these things, they've got a lot of symptoms and they're a bit at a loss of where to go, it's always great to reach out for some professional advice and seek assistance to really help you get on top of a lot of the health things that happen.
Thanks, Denise. That information is so important,
Yes,
I think, for many of our viewers. If you'd like to know more about Denise and how genes can have such an important influence on menopausal symptoms, please go to Denise's webpage on our website, healthwellbeingandlifestyle.com.au. And after the break, we have another interesting guest with another interesting topic.
Stay tuned. After the break, men's coach and registered nurse, Kosta Michalopoulos, will be talking about how men manage relationships. Welcome back. Our last guest today is men's coach and registered nurse, Costa Michalopoulos, and he's here to talk to us about how men manage relationships. Welcome to the program, Costa.
Thank you so much for having me, Melissa.
How do men manage relationships?
Relationships is not our forte traditionally for us men, and that comes, I think, looking back at the narrative that we have been passed on from our society, from our parents, from our families, not to express our emotions. And I think that's the fundamental point here. We don't tend to speak. We don't tend to say what we want and what we need. And if we do and we don't get the right answer, we tend to sort of withdraw. But in saying that, there is the other approach as well, where we provide, we become the providers, where we focus on that, and that becomes our main, almost our sole purpose. And that can have a significant impact on the relationship as well, because that will create resentment for our partners, resentment for our family. So how do we actually manage this? Awareness. Awareness is the first step. Awareness of our needs, our beliefs, our values, our emotions, and then how do we actually communicate? And one of the most important tools is emotional intelligence. And someone will say, what is emotional intelligence? I think the word says it. It's not the intellect, it's how we manage this. How do we process our emotions and maybe expand our vocabulary as men, besides saying I'm good or I'm bad, like have a few different emotions in there, whether it's anger, being scared, being vulnerable. And by doing this, we invite our partners, we invite our loved ones into our inner world. And that is the first step.
With communication, how do men fare?
If it's not silence, it's silence. It's us men, unfortunately, we tend to suppress our emotions, and that will show through the communication by not engaging. Yes, in the relationship, how does that look? It can create a lot of conflict, it can create resentment, and it has an immediate impact within the family, because things are not being discussed, things are not being resolved, and creates layers of complexity, layers of the resentment, layers of issues, unresolved issues. And eventually, unfortunately, we see in Australia these days, 1 in 2 marriages almost leads to a divorce. And that's the direct impact of the lack of communication. So communication is probably the most important thing in a healthy relationship. And what does it mean for us men? How do we actually communicate? And that's a hard thing. Again, awareness of our emotions, of our needs. How do we bring this into? By being vulnerable. And this is a new word that we hear in these days all the time. What does it mean for a man to be vulnerable? To be in touch with their emotions. That's where the emotional intelligence comes in. Understanding what is happening here and being able to verbalize that. And with our partners, with our family, be able to say what's happening. And by not shutting down is not helping anyone. And a lot of men will use the excuse, almost the excuse of being the provider. I'm busy, I'm working, I'm providing for you, which is absolutely beautiful and fair, and we need to celebrate. But if you use this as an excuse, where is this leading? What's happening within the relationship? Because obviously we need the necessities, we need the house, we need the food, but after that, what happens? Where do we draw the line? And as men, we need to be able to communicate that clearly with our partners. And we need to be able to listen as well. What is happening? What do we need to do? And another little thing there I want to mention is the active listening. Not the listening where you're holding the phone, or not the listening where you're watching the footy on TV. That's not listening. Listen without interruptions. Listen without our minds traveling. Just be fully present. And that will have an immediate impact, because our partners will feel that they've been heard, they've been respected, and they will feel safe. And that will nurture the communication, the effective communication, which is based on love and kindness.
Do you have any tips for men in relationships?
Communication, obviously, it's not going to be the only solution. We need to do other things as well. And time, quality time is very, very important. What does that mean? How does that look? Even the 5 minutes before we leave to go to work, or the 5 minutes when we come back and we have a conversation where we ask, how actually was your day? That 5 minutes can actually make or break a relationship. And obviously, you know, we need to expand this a bit more, whether it's going to be the romantic date, the occasional, or even the frequent romantic date, the weekend away, the holidays, the quality time where we need to prioritize our time and our relationship instead of all the external stuff that's happening. We all have busy lives, we all have responsibilities, but if we don't nurture our relationship, we know that sooner or later it's going to break down. The other thing that is very important is, how do we manage conflict? There is not a single relationship without conflict. And if there is such a relationship, that means that things are not being said. Conflict is part of a healthy relationship. But how do we manage that? Obviously, if conflict is not dealt with care and with kindness and with love, can create resentment, can create hate, can create isolation, loneliness, because things are not being resolved. So how do we actually communicate when we feel intrigued, when we feel challenged in a conversation? What I find that works perfect with me is just taking a breath. Just taking a simple breath, and just before I respond, before I react, I just think, what am I going to say? That split second or 3 seconds, when you take that little break, can actually have such a significant impact, because you take control of your emotions. And then by also thinking what the other person is experiencing, we can't fix things by ourselves, and that's when it's a good opportunity to ask for help, whether it's a relationships counselor, whether speaking with someone outside of the immediate environment, and get a different perspective, get the clarity. It is very, very important.
That was really informative. Thanks, Kosta.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you'd like to know more about how men manage relationships and Kosta, go to his webpage on our website, healthwellbeingandlifestyle.com.au. And that's all we have time for today. Goodbye.
If you'd like to know more about our show, please like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.